Without warning, the chamber trembled. Panels in the walls slid open, revealing strange, insect-like machines that crawled out with mechanical precision. Their bodies were sleek, black, and covered in glowing symbols, their many legs clicking against the metallic floor. Jacob cursed under his breath, stepping protectively in front of the weakened colonists. I knew they wouldn't play fair. The leader raised a hand, and the machines paused, their sharp appendages poised to strike. "You have one chance to reconsider," she said, her voice echoing with an otherworldly hum. "Surrender now, and your colony will survive. Resist, and this moment of mercy will be your last." Ethan's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "You're not giving us a choice. If we surrender, you'll still take what you want. If we resist, you'll destroy us. Either way, you lose. Humanity fights back." The leader's expression darkened. "You underestimate us, human." Before Ethan could respond, the walls of the chamber began to shift. The smooth metallic surfaces transformed into a maze of sharp angles and glowing symbols. The floor pulsed beneath their feet, making it impossible to stand still. The insect-like machines sprang into motion, moving with terrifying speed. "Get them out of here," Ethan shouted to Jacob, who didn't hesitate. He grabbed one of the weaker colonists and guided the others toward a narrow corridor that had opened in the chaos. Ethan stayed behind, his mind racing for a way to stall the machines. As one of the machines lunged toward him, Ethan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding its razor-sharp limbs. He grabbed the tracker from his pocket, its screen flickering wildly with alien symbols. If this worked before, it has to work again, he thought. Adjusting the settings, he pointed it at the nearest machine and pressed the button. The tracker emitted a high-pitched pulse, and the machine froze mid-lunge, its legs twitching violently. Encouraged, Ethan adjusted the frequency and aimed at another machine. This time, the pulse was stronger, and two more machines stopped in their tracks. The alien leader's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Enough. The remaining machines halted, their glowing eyes dimming. The chamber quieted, but the tension was electric. The leader stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "You are clever, human. Resourceful. But cleverness will not save you." Ethan met her gaze, his jaw tight. "It's not just cleverness, it's survival. And we're better at it than you think." The leader's glowing eyes flickered, and for the first time, Ethan thought he saw something like doubt. She turned to her subordinates, speaking in their strange, melodic language. The alien women seemed hesitant, their forms shifting uneasily. Finally, the leader turned back to Ethan. "Your defiance is admirable," she said, "but it is also foolish. We have nothing left to lose." Ethan took a step closer, his voice steady. "You do have something left to lose. Your future. You said it yourself. You're trying to rebuild, to survive. But if you destroy us, you'll lose the only chance you have." The leader's gaze narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she gestured to the machines, which began to withdraw, disappearing back into the walls. The chamber's glow dimmed, and the trembling subsided. For a moment, it felt as if the room itself was holding its breath. Finally, the leader spoke, her voice quieter now. "You believe your kind can offer salvation. Yet your actions bring only chaos. Prove to me that humanity is worth sparing." Ethan nodded, his resolve unshaken. "We will. But it starts with trust, and you letting us leave." The leader hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering like dying stars. Then, with a wave of her hand, the chamber's walls shifted, revealing a path leading out of the structure. "Go," she said, "but understand this. Trust is fragile. If you fail, we will not show mercy again." Ethan turned to Jacob and the others, who had been watching silently. "Let's move," he said. As they hurried through the corridor, the leader's voice followed them, soft but sharp. "Do not disappoint me, human." Ethan glanced back, his heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, they had bought themselves time. And time, Ethan knew, was humanity's greatest weapon. A shocking resolution. The path through the alien structure felt almost too quiet, as if the entire facility was holding its breath. The corridors were sleek and unnervingly sterile, the walls glowing faintly as they passed. Despite the tension that hung in the air, the colonists walked swiftly, their steps hurried yet unsure. They had just narrowly escaped the clutches of the alien women, and their survival depended on what would happen next. Ethan and Jacob led the way, keeping a sharp eye on the increasingly erratic signals from the tracker in Ethan's hand. Every now and then, it would pulse with static, as if the ship's systems were responding to their presence. Ethan's mind raced. This was it, the final move. They couldn't afford to fail. They reached the exit after what felt like hours, and a great door slid open before them. The strange alien landscape of Zolonia greeted them, familiar yet unsettling. The once serene, uninhabited terrain now felt like a vast, hostile wilderness, the air thick with the anticipation of what was to come. There was no turning back. The group stood in stunned silence for a moment, unsure of whether to feel triumphant or terrified. They had escaped the alien facility, but it wasn't over. The alien women hadn't kept their promise, and Ethan couldn't help but feel that they were walking into a larger trap, one that might be more devastating than any they had faced before. "We're not out of the woods yet," Jacob muttered, his voice low. "They're still out there, and they still have our people." Ethan didn't argue. The leader's words rang in his head. "If you fail, we will not show mercy again." He knew that they had to act fast, or everything they had risked would be for nothing. "We need to regroup," Ethan said firmly. "There's no more running. We're going to face them head-on, and this time, we do it on our terms." As the colonists hurried back to the safety of their hidden outpost, Ethan's thoughts began to shift. They had barely managed to escape, and there was no telling how long it would take before the aliens came after them again. They were desperate and resourceful, and they had a powerful advantage: their understanding of human resilience. That night, as the colony worked in haste to gather their weapons and devise a plan, Ethan and Jacob spoke in private. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Jacob asked, his voice quieter than usual. Ethan nodded, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him. "I'm thinking about what the leader said. If we fail, we won't show mercy. They're not just trying to survive. They're running out of time, and that makes them dangerous." Jacob glanced over his shoulder, ensuring no one was listening. "You don't really believe they'll leave us alone, do you? Not after everything." "No," Ethan said, his tone resolute. "They won't, but we can't just sit here and wait for them to come. We need to take the fight to them. We need to make them see that humanity isn't something they can just take, something they can use up and discard." Jacob stared at him for a long moment. "You want to fight them. You think we can beat them." "I know we can," Ethan said firmly. "If we fight smart, if we outthink them, we stand a chance. But we have to act now. We can't let them destroy us, our people. We're not their resources, Jacob. We're a species that stood the test of time. We fight for our future." Jacob met his gaze, his face set with determination. "I'm with you, Ethan. Let's do it." The plan was simple but dangerous. Ethan knew that if they didn't act fast, the alien women would finish what they had started. They would drain the energy from their people until nothing remained. The only way to stop them now was to cut off their power, destabilize their technology, and give them no choice but to retreat. The next day, under the cover of night, Ethan led a small team of colonists to infiltrate the alien structure once again. The hope was to find their central power core, the heart of the facility that controlled all the systems, including the energy harvesting pods. If they could destroy that, the entire operation would collapse. As they approached the entrance, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The facility's outer walls shimmered in the low light of the alien world, almost as if the place was alive, breathing. The soft, eerie hum of alien machinery echoed from within, reminding them of the peril they faced. "This is it," Ethan whispered, checking the tracker one last time. The signals had gone silent, too silent. It felt like they were walking into the lion's den. But they had no other choice. The group moved swiftly, their weapons drawn and ready. They knew the alien women would be prepared, but they also knew the aliens couldn't predict how far the colonists had come. They were no longer the frightened settlers who had stumbled onto an alien world. They were fighters now, survivalists, and they wouldn't back down. They breached the facility, silently navigating the dark corridors until they reached the heart of the structure. There, in the center of the vast chamber, was the core, a massive, pulsating crystal, surrounded by glowing tendrils that connected it to every pod, every trap, every piece of machinery. Without hesitation, Ethan planted the device he had designed to overload the system. The countdown began. As the device hummed to life, the alien women arrived, led by the same figure who had spared them earlier. The leader's eyes narrowed as she saw what Ethan was doing. "No," she said, her voice cold and final. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand." "I understand enough," Ethan replied. "We're not going to let you use us. We're not your tools." The leader took a step forward, but before she could react, the device activated. The core shattered with an ear-splitting crack, sending a shockwave of energy through the chamber. The alien women stumbled back, their glowing forms flickering as the facility began to collapse around them. Ethan and his team barely made it out in time, the structure crumbling behind them as the energy that powered it all faded into nothing. As they stood in the wreckage, Ethan turned to the leader, who had watched them from a distance. There was no smile, no victory, just the unspoken weight of what had happened. "You had your chance," Ethan said quietly. The leader said nothing, her eyes filled with a mix of admiration and regret. She turned away, her form flickering in the fading light. And then, without a word, she and her people disappeared into the wilderness, leaving humanity to rebuild and to prove that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they would never give up. Ethan watched them leave, knowing that the battle was over, for now. But the war for humanity's future would always continue. And as long as there was hope, as long as they had the will to fight, humanity would stand tall. The fight for survival had only just begun. The strange disappearances. The Earth colony on Zolonia was supposed to be a new start for humanity. It was a planet filled with endless forests, shimmering blue rivers, and skies that never seemed to darken. For years, the settlers lived peacefully, growing crops, building homes, and exploring the strange yet beautiful land. But recently, something had changed. Men had started to disappear. At first, nobody noticed anything unusual. The colony was large, and people often wandered off to explore or gather resources. But when Michael Grant, a skilled mechanic, vanished without a trace, people grew uneasy. He had left his tools neatly arranged in the workshop and had been planning to return home for dinner. His wife, Elena, waited for hours, but Michael never came back. The next morning, search parties were sent into the surrounding forest. They combed through the trees, calling his name, but found nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing at all. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. A few days later, another man disappeared. Then another. The disappearances always followed the same pattern. The men would leave their homes, sometimes just to run a quick errand, and then vanish without a trace. Their belongings were often left behind, untouched. The settlers began locking their doors at night and refusing to go outside alone. Whispers of a curse spread through the colony. Some said the forest was alive, while others believed the planet's native creatures were hunting them. Nobody knew for sure, but everyone was afraid. Ethan was a young farmer in the colony. Unlike most of the settlers, he wasn't married and didn't have children to protect. But he had a sharp mind and a curious nature. While others avoided the forest, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what was out there. He had grown up listening to stories of Earth's wilderness and had always dreamed of being an explorer. Now, with the disappearances growing more frequent, he felt a sense of responsibility. Someone had to find out what was happening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat on his porch, staring at the dark line of trees in the distance. The forest seemed to call to him, its shadows shifting in the fading light. He didn't believe in curses or ghosts, but he couldn't deny that something strange was happening. As he sat there, he noticed something unusual, a faint glow deep within the forest. It wasn't firelight or the soft shimmer of the planet's bioluminescent plants. This light was different, almost like a pulse, beating steadily in the distance. The next morning, Ethan spoke to his best friend, Jacob, a hunter who had lived on Zolonia longer than most. Jacob was older and more cautious, but he trusted Ethan's instincts. When Ethan mentioned the glowing light, Jacob nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen it too," Jacob admitted, "but I didn't think much of it. This planet is full of strange things we don't understand." "What if it's connected to the disappearances?" Ethan asked. "What if it's a signal or some kind of trap?" Jacob hesitated. "If it is, we need to be careful. Whatever's out there, it's not friendly." That night, Ethan and Jacob decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights and basic tools, they ventured into the forest. The air was cool and damp, and the trees loomed over them like silent sentinels. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig set their nerves on edge. But they pressed on, following the faint glow in the distance. As they walked, they noticed strange markings on the trees, deep, jagged lines that didn't look natural. Ethan knelt to examine one, running his fingers over the grooves. They were too precise to be caused by animals. Nearby, they found a patch of disturbed soil, as if something heavy had been dragged through the area. "Someone, or something, was here," Ethan whispered. Jacob nodded, gripping his flashlight tightly. "We should turn back. This doesn't feel right." But Ethan was determined. "We're close, just a little further." They continued, their footsteps muffled by the soft moss covering the forest floor. The glow grew brighter, its rhythm steady and hypnotic. Then, without warning, they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was a strange metallic structure. It was small and dome-shaped, covered in alien symbols that pulsed with light. Surrounding it were deep holes in the ground, almost like traps. Ethan and Jacob exchanged a worried glance. Before they could move closer, a sound broke the silence. Soft, melodic humming. It was faint at first, almost like a lullaby, but it grew louder with every second. The sound sent chills down Ethan's spine. He felt an odd pull, as if the melody was drawing him toward the structure. Jacob grabbed his arm, snapping him out of the trance. "We need to leave now," Jacob said firmly. Reluctantly, Ethan nodded, and they began to back away. But as they turned, they heard a soft giggle, high-pitched and otherworldly. It seemed to come from all around them, echoing through the trees. The two men froze, their hearts pounding. The forest was no longer silent. Something was watching them. This was no ordinary disappearance, Ethan realized. Whatever was happening on Zolonia was far more dangerous and far more intelligent than anyone had imagined. The seductive traps. Ethan and Jacob didn't stop running until they were back at the edge of the forest. Their breaths came in gasps, and their hearts pounded like drums. The eerie giggling still echoed in Ethan's mind, making the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Whatever was out there wasn't just intelligent. It was playing with them. The Colony Council, a group of seasoned settlers who made decisions for the community, listened to Ethan's report the next morning with grim expressions. Mayor Alden, an older man with a grizzled beard, leaned forward. "You're telling us there's something in the forest, something that's luring our men away." "Yes," Ethan replied. "I don't know who or what they are, but they're leaving traps. And that melody, it's like it was calling to us." The room fell silent. Finally, Dr. Kira, the colony's biologist, spoke up. This planet is full of life forms we've never seen before. If these beings are using traps and music, it means they're advanced, maybe even sentient. They're predators, Jacob interrupted. Sentient or not, they're hunting us. Mayor Alden nodded slowly. We need answers, but more importantly, we need to protect our people. No one goes into the forest until we know what we're dealing with. Despite the warning, Ethan couldn't shake his curiosity. He spent the next day gathering supplies: rope, a small blade, and a handheld tracker designed to detect unusual energy signals. That night, he convinced Jacob to join him again. I know it's risky, Ethan admitted, but if we don't figure this out, more people will disappear. You saw those traps, Jacob. They weren't meant for animals. They were meant for us. Reluctantly, Jacob agreed. Together, they ventured back into the forest, this time moving slower, more cautiously. The woods seemed darker than before, and the shadows felt alive, shifting with every step. The faint glow appeared again, pulsing like a heartbeat, drawing them deeper. As they moved, they began noticing the traps. Some were simple, pits covered with leaves, sharp stakes waiting at the bottom. Others were more sophisticated, wires strung between trees, triggered by the slightest touch. The traps seemed designed not just to catch, but to disorient and confuse. Ethan stopped abruptly, motioning for Jacob to do the same. Ahead of them was a shimmering orb, floating a few feet above the ground. It was translucent, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. Inside, strange symbols swirled, changing shape like liquid metal. What is that? Jacob whispered. I don't know, Ethan replied. He reached out cautiously with a stick, tapping the orb. Instantly, the ground beneath the orb erupted, revealing a hidden net that snapped upward, its edges lined with razor-sharp filaments. The stick was sliced in half. Jacob cursed under his breath. That could have been us. Ethan knelt to inspect the trap. These aren't random. Someone, or something, designed this. They know how we think, how we move. As they continued, the forest seemed to close in around them. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining like claws. The faint humming began again, soft and melodic, weaving through the air. This time, the sound was accompanied by flashes of light, like fireflies dancing in the darkness. Ethan stopped, his eyes narrowing. It's a distraction, he said. The light, the sound. It's all meant to lure us in. Jacob frowned. Then why do I feel like walking toward it? Ethan turned to him, alarmed. Jacob's eyes were unfocused, his expression dazed. Without warning, Jacob stepped forward, his movements sluggish, like he was in a trance. Ethan grabbed his arm, shaking him. Snap out of it, Ethan hissed. Jacob blinked, the daze fading. I don't know what happened. It was like the sound was inside my head. The two men pressed on, more wary than ever. As they moved, they noticed patterns emerging, clearings arranged in concentric circles, paths that always seemed to lead back to the glowing orbs. It was like the forest itself was alive, guiding them into a trap. Finally, they reached another clearing. This one was larger, its center dominated by a strange structure. It was shaped like a spire, smooth and metallic, with lines of light running along its surface. Surrounding it were more traps, some visible, others barely detectable. But the spire wasn't the most alarming thing. Near the base of the spire stood a figure. It was a woman, or at least it looked like one. Her skin shimmered like silver in the moonlight, and her hair flowed around her like liquid strands of light. She wore no clothing, yet her body seemed to shift and glow, as if it was made of energy rather than flesh. Her eyes were large and glowing, and her lips curled into a smile as she gazed at them. "Welcome," she said, her voice like a melody. "We've been expecting you." Ethan and Jacob froze, their instincts screaming at them to run. But something about her voice held them in place, like an invisible tether. The woman tilted her head, studying them. "You're different," she said softly, her smile widening. You're stronger than the others. Ethan forced himself to speak. Who are you? What do you want? The woman laughed, a sound both beautiful and chilling. You'll find out soon enough. Before they could react, the ground beneath them shifted, and the world went dark. First contact with the alien girls. Ethan awoke to an eerie stillness. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt heavy, as though he had been drugged. Slowly, he opened his eyes, the dim light around him sharp and cold. He wasn't in the forest anymore. The trees, the traps, the strange woman, everything was gone. Instead, he found himself inside a vast chamber carved from a shimmering metallic material that seemed alive, pulsating faintly under his hands. Jacob lay a few feet away, unconscious but breathing. Ethan crawled over, shaking him gently. Jacob, wake up. We have to move. Jacob groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Where are we? I don't know, Ethan replied, but we're not alone. The air around them was thick with an unnatural energy. Strange symbols floated in the air, glowing faintly before vanishing like smoke. The room was silent except for the faint hum of machinery, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within Ethan's chest. Then he saw them. At the far end of the chamber, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were the same alien women Ethan had seen before, their bodies glowing faintly, their movements fluid and unnatural. There were 5 of them, each more beautiful and more unsettling than the last. Their skin shimmered like molten silver, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. They moved in perfect synchrony, their steps silent as they approached. Ethan and Jacob scrambled to their feet, their backs against the cool metallic wall. The tallest of the alien women stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Ethan. She was the same one they had seen in the clearing, her smile sharp and knowing. You are awake, she said, her voice melodic and haunting. Good. It is time we spoke. What do you want with us? Ethan demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. The woman tilted her head, studying him like a predator might study its prey. You asked the wrong question, she said. It is not what we want with you. It is what you can do for us. Ethan narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? The woman ignored him, turning to one of the others. The second alien raised her hand, and a holographic image appeared in the air between them. It showed a scene of chaos. An alien city, its towers crumbling, its people fleeing as strange, shadowy creatures descended upon them. Our world is dying, the leader said, her tone softer now, almost mournful. The Sci-Fi, parasites that consume all in their path, destroyed our home, our people. We fled to survive, but not all of us made it. Our males, they were the first to fall. Ethan and Jacob exchanged a glance, unsure of how to respond. The leader stepped closer, her glowing eyes locking onto Ethan's. You are strong. Your kind has the resilience we lack. Your males possess what we need to rebuild, to ensure our survival. Jacob tensed. So, what? You're abducting us to breed? Is that it? The leader's smile returned, sharper than before. Breed? No, that is crude and inefficient. We do not require your cooperation, only your essence. Your bodies are merely vessels. Ethan's stomach churned. You're experimenting on us. That's what the traps are for. The leader shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. We harvest. It is necessary. Necessary, Ethan snapped. You're killing people, stealing them from their families. The leader's gaze hardened. Would you not do the same to save your kind? Survival requires sacrifice. Do not pretend your species is different. Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. These women weren't mindless predators. They were desperate survivors. But their methods were monstrous, and he couldn't let them continue. He glanced at Jacob, who was glaring at the aliens with barely contained fury. Let us go, Ethan said, forcing his voice to remain calm. We can help you find another way. There has to be another way. The leader laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You think we have not tried. Your kind is the solution, whether you accept it or not. Before Ethan could respond, the chamber's walls shifted, panels sliding open to reveal rows of glowing pods. Inside each pod was a man from the colony, their bodies suspended in some kind of liquid. They appeared unharmed, but their faces were pale, their expressions blank. Jacob lunged forward, his voice a roar. You monsters! Let them go! Two of the alien women raised their hands, and Jacob froze mid-step, his body locked in place as if by invisible chains. Ethan moved to help him, but the leader held up a hand. And he stopped, the air around him suddenly thick and oppressive. Do not make this harder than it needs to be, the leader said, her voice colder now. Your colony is small. We will take what we need, and you will be returned unharmed. Resist, and you will join them. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't fight them. Not like this. But he wasn't going to let them take any more lives. He glanced at Jacob, who was struggling against the invisible force holding him. Then he looked at the pods, at the men trapped inside, and an idea began to form. If he could just stall them, buy enough time to figure out how their technology worked, maybe, just maybe, he could turn it against them. The leader stepped closer, her glowing eyes narrowing. Do not mistake our mercy for weakness. Accept your fate, or face the consequences. Ethan met her gaze, his jaw tight. We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever. The leader's smile faded, replaced by something far more dangerous. Then you leave us no choice. The reason behind the traps. The leader's cold expression remained etched in Ethan's mind as she turned away. The other alien women moved in perfect silence, their glowing forms casting eerie reflections on the chamber walls. Ethan's heart raced as he stared at the pods holding the men from the colony. Their pale faces looked lifeless, yet he could see the faint rise and fall of their chests. They were alive, barely. The leader gestured toward one of the pods, and it slid forward, hovering effortlessly in the air. The liquid inside shimmered as strange tendrils of light moved over the man's body, extracting faint particles of energy that floated upward into a crystalline container. Ethan's stomach churned. Energy harvesting. The leader explained, her tone almost clinical. Your kind possesses a vitality unlike anything we have encountered, a strength that could save us. Ethan clenched his fists. Save you? By draining us dry. The leader's gaze hardened. Your energy replenishes. You recover. This is sustainable. For both of us. Jacob, finally freed from the invisible force holding him, stepped forward angrily. Sustainable. What happens when you've taken too much? What happens when someone doesn't recover? The leader didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to one of the other alien women, who handed her the glowing crystal. Sacrifices are inevitable in survival, she said coldly. Your species fights wars, destroys ecosystems, consumes your planet's resources. Are we so different? Ethan's mind raced. He could feel Jacob's frustration boiling over beside him, but he knew anger wouldn't help them now. You don't have to do this, Ethan said, his voice calmer. We have scientists, people who can help. Let us go, and we'll find another way. The leader tilted her head, studying him as if he were an insect beneath a magnifying glass. Another way, she echoed. Do you think we haven't tried? Your kind is our last hope. Without you, we face extinction. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. Ethan realized she wasn't lying. These women were fighting for their survival. But their methods were horrifying, and he couldn't let them continue. Jacob, however, wasn't in the mood for negotiations. You're parasites, he snapped. You talk about survival, but you're no better than the Sylphar you ran from. The leader's glowing eyes narrowed, and the chamber seemed to grow colder. Watch your words, human, she said sharply. You do not understand the depths of our suffering. Ethan stepped between Jacob and the alien leader, trying to diffuse the tension. You're right. We don't understand. So help us understand. Tell us why you're doing this." The leader hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering briefly. Then, with a wave of her hand, the holographic images returned. This time, they showed more than just destruction. They showed families, alien children playing, cities thriving under twin suns, a civilization full of life. But the images darkened, replaced by scenes of chaos. The Sci-Fi were relentless, consuming everything in their path. Buildings crumbled, and entire communities were wiped out. The leader's voice softened. "We lost everything. Our homes, our people, our future. Only we remained, the few who escaped." But escape was not enough. Our biology was tied to our males, and without them, we began to wither. Another alien woman stepped forward, her voice softer than the leader's. "Our kind cannot reproduce without balance. Our males were the foundation of our species. When they were lost, we fractured." Ethan frowned. "Fractured?" The woman nodded. "Our forms became unstable. Our energy, our essence, it began to fade. Your kind, with your resilience, your adaptability, you are the key to stabilizing us. With your energy, we can rebuild, restore what was lost." Jacob scoffed. "So you think that justifies abducting people, draining them like batteries?" The leader's gaze sharpened. "We do what we must. Would you not do the same for your people?" Ethan shook his head. "Not like this. Not by sacrificing innocent lives." The leader stepped closer to Ethan, her towering form radiating power. "You speak of innocence, yet your species is far from innocent. You destroy, you conquer, you take what you need without thought for others. We are no different." Her words struck a chord in Ethan. She wasn't entirely wrong. Humanity had its own dark history of survival at the expense of others. But that didn't make this right. "There's always a choice," Ethan said firmly. "And you're making the wrong one." The leader stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned to the other alien women, speaking in a language Ethan couldn't understand. The air grew heavy with tension as they debated, their glowing forms flickering like flames. Finally, the leader turned back to him. "Very well," she said. "We will give you a chance. Convince us there is another way, and we will listen. But if you fail, your colony will be ours." Ethan's chest tightened. This was their only shot, a slim, dangerous chance to stop these beings and save the colony. He nodded, determination hardening his resolve. "I'll convince you," he said, "because I won't let my people suffer for your survival." Ethan's plan to rescue the captives. Ethan and Jacob were escorted back to the chamber where the captive colonists floated in their glowing pods. The alien women stood silently, their eyes watching every movement. The leader's words echoed in Ethan's mind. "Convince us there is another way, and we will listen. Fail, and your colony will be ours." Ethan had no intention of leaving it to negotiation alone. As soon as they were left alone, Ethan turned to Jacob, his voice low. "We need to think fast. They won't keep their word if they don't like what we offer. We can't just wait and hope for mercy." Jacob crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "I wasn't planning on waiting. What's the plan?" Ethan glanced around the room, studying the glowing pods and the faint energy streams connecting them to the chamber's walls. "We need to disable this system," he said, "but not outright. If we just smash things, they'll stop us before we even start. We need to disrupt their tech without them realizing it." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we do that? They've got tech way beyond ours." Ethan pulled the small tracker from his pocket, the one he had brought to trace the energy signals in the forest. It hummed softly in his hand, the screen flickering with strange symbols. This thing picked up their energy fields before. Maybe it can send something back. Jacob stared at the device skeptically. "You're going to hack alien tech with a piece of human scrap." Ethan smirked. "Got a better idea." Before Jacob could respond, one of the alien women entered the chamber. She wasn't the leader, but her presence radiated authority. Her gaze landed on Ethan and Jacob, like a hawk spotting prey. "Have you reached a decision?" she asked, her voice smoother than the leader's but just as unsettling. Ethan forced himself to remain calm. "We need time. If you want a solution, we have to think it through. Otherwise, it'll fail." The alien woman narrowed her eyes, but after a moment she nodded. "Time is not infinite. Do not waste it." She turned and left, the door sliding shut behind her. Jacob exhaled sharply. She's buying it. For now. Ethan wasted no time. He crouched by the nearest pod, examining the intricate patterns of light flowing over its surface. The tracker in his hand vibrated slightly as it detected the energy streams. "These pods are all connected," he murmured. "If we disrupt one, it might cause a chain reaction." Jacob frowned. "What about the guys inside? We can't risk hurting them." Ethan nodded. "That's why we need to control the disruption. Just enough to disable the system, not enough to harm them." He tinkered with the tracker, adjusting its settings. The screen flickered, and a faint hum filled the air. Jacob glanced at the chamber's entrance. "You better work fast. They're not going to leave us alone for long." As Ethan worked, he couldn't help but think of the alien women's desperation. They weren't mindless monsters. They were survivors, fighting for their existence. But their methods were wrong. The colonists weren't resources to be harvested. They were people with families and lives worth protecting. Finally, the tracker emitted a soft beep. Ethan smiled grimly. "Got it. This should overload the energy grid just enough to shut it down temporarily." Jacob clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Let's make it count." Ethan activated the device, placing it against the base of one of the pods. The hum of the chamber grew louder, the glowing streams of energy flickering erratically. The pods dimmed slightly, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the alarms began. A piercing sound echoed through the chamber as red lights flared along the walls. The door burst open, and 3 alien women rushed in, their glowing eyes sharp with anger. The leader wasn't among them, but their hostility was unmistakable. "What have you done?" one of them demanded, her voice reverberating like a crashing wave. Ethan stepped forward, raising his hands. "We're showing you what happens when you push people too far." The alien women advanced, their forms shifting like liquid, their hands glowing with energy. Before they could attack, the tracker emitted another pulse, and the entire chamber shuddered. The energy streams connecting the pods faltered, and the glowing crystals dimmed further. The captives inside stirred faintly, their faces no longer blank. Ethan seized the moment. "Your system is failing," he said, his voice steady. "We can help you stabilize it, but only if you release the men." The alien women hesitated, their glowing forms flickering. The leader's voice suddenly echoed through the chamber, amplified by unseen speakers. "Enough." She entered, her presence commanding. The other women stepped back as she approached Ethan, her gaze cold and calculating. "You have proven resourceful," she said, "but resourcefulness alone will not save your people." Ethan held her gaze. "Neither will your methods. Work with us. Let us help you, but not like this." The leader studied him for a long moment. The chamber's alarms continued to blare, and the pod's lights flickered weakly. Finally, she turned to her subordinates. "Release the captives." The alien women protested, but the leader silenced them with a wave of her hand. "We have seen enough." The pods opened one by one, the liquid inside draining away. The colonists stumbled out, weak but alive. Jacob rushed to help them, his relief evident. Ethan turned back to the leader. "This isn't over," he said, "but it's a start." The leader's expression remained unreadable. "You are bold, human. Boldness is dangerous, but perhaps necessary. We will see if your kind is worth trusting." As the captives were freed, Ethan knew the battle was far from over. The aliens' desperation and humanity's resilience were now locked in a fragile balance. But for now, they had won a small victory, and it was enough to keep hope alive. The final confrontation. The alien leader's command to release the captives brought temporary relief, but Ethan knew better than to trust it. The glow in her eyes hadn't dimmed, nor had the tension in her movements softened. This was no truce. It was a pause, and pauses always ended. Jacob helped the freed colonists stand, their legs wobbly and their expressions blank with exhaustion. The alien women retreated to the far end of the chamber, their forms flickering like disturbed holograms. The leader stayed, her gaze locked on Ethan. "You've disrupted our systems," she said coldly. "The men are free. What now, human? Do you believe this resolves anything?" Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "This isn't over, but it's a start. We'll help you find another way, one that doesn't destroy lives." Her lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her glowing eyes. "Do you think mercy is a shield? Your actions have made you a threat, and threats must be eliminated."